All right, so we ended our last discussion looking at bone development and growth. We looked at both intramembranous, we discussed intramembranous bones and endochondral bones. Basically, what we were saying there is we were looking at the way that those bones form, one of those being the intramembranous ossification. Uh, Remember that both in intramembranous ossification and endochondral ossification, both mechanisms involve that replacement of the existing connective tissue with the bone. So in the intramembranous ossification, we do see that it is when a bone forms on or within that fibrous connective tissue membrane. And remember that flat bones are formed in this manner. So that would be the skull bones or flat bones, and then the sternum. And we'll look at the sternum a little bit more when we start to look at the vertebrae and the rib cage. And then there was endochondral ossification. Basically, in endochondral bones is when bones have that formation of hyaline cartilage, and it forms the models for future bones. And this is evident in most of the bones of the skeletal system. So it's basically you have that primary ossification where the center hardens during the fetus and infant stages, and then you have secondary ossification centers that will develop in a child and then fully harden during adolescence and early adulthood. So basically what we do see there is during infancy and childhood, long bones lengthen entirely by the growth at those epiphyseal plates or the longitudinal growth, and all bones grow in thickness. That would be appositional growth. And here you can see a picture of endochondral ossification where the hyaline cartilage model, you have primary ossification centers, you have secondary ossification centers, you have the epiphyseal plate, and you see osteoblast and osteoclast there in the picture. We also looked at growth at the epiphyseal plate. When we looked at the growth at the epiphyseal plate, there are several zones. We said there's the zone of resting cartilage. That's the first layer of cells closest to the end of the epiphysis. These would be considered resting cells, and it anchors the epiphyseal plate to the epiphysis. The zone of proliferating cartilage is the second layer of cells, and there you have many rows of young cells that are going to undergo that mitosis. So if you look, here's where you do see that. The third zone is the zone of hypertrophic cartilage. Here's where you have older cells that are going to be left behind when new cells appear, and the cells are enlarging and becoming calcified, so they're becoming harder. And eventually you get into the zone of calcified cartilage. That would be the fourth layer of cells, and these are thin dead cells that are indeed fully classified. When you look there with the zone of calcified cartilage, you do secrete acids that will decompose the calcium salts into Ca2 plus and PO4 minus. So this is outlined on pages 209, figures 7.1 and 7.2, 7.11 and 7.2. Basically, this whole ossification of bones is completed by the age of 25. So that's where we ended our discussion, looking at the ossification of bone and growth of the bone. Now let's finish our lecture looking at homeostasis of bone tissue. And basically, what we see is that bone remodeling occurs throughout life. You have bone resorption, the action of osteoclast, where you're going to build new bone. And then you have the bone deposition action of osteoblast. 10 to 20% of the skeleton is replaced each year. And there are a number of factors that are going to play a role in that whole development of bone throughout your lifetime. So once bones are formed, the actions of osteoclast and osteoblast are going to continue remodeling them. Just to recall that osteoclasts are resorbing the bone and osteoblasts replace the bone, and the opposing processes are highly regulated, so that the total mass of bone tissue in an adult skeleton is relatively constant, even though you have about 3 to 5% of bone calcium that is being exchanged each year. So the factors that do affect bone development, growth, and repair, a number of these factors influence these three things: the development, growth, and repair of bones. And it includes both nutrition, exposure to sunlight, hormonal secretions, and physical exercise. So when you look at as far as nutrition, there are a couple of vitamins that play a role there. Vitamin D greatly increases the intestinal absorption of dietary calcium and retards its urine loss. And basically, vitamin D deficiencies is what's going to cause rickets in children and osteomalacia in adults. Also, vitamin D is found in dairy products, and vitamin D is synthesized in the skin with exposure to sunlight. Vitamin A is another vitamin as far as a nutritional aid in affecting bone, and it's required for bone reabsorption, and it controls the activity distribution and coordination of those osteoblasts and osteoclasts during development. And then lastly, nutritionally, you have vitamin C. And vitamin C helps maintain the bone matrix, that collagen synthesis that gives bone some of its tensile strength there. So you get that out from the vitamin C. And when you have a deficiency of vitamin C, that's when you have scurvy. So a deficiency in vitamin C can lead to scurvy. Basically, exposure to sunlight, you can see that in your book. It talks about vitamin D production, and that will retard, not retard, vitamin D production helps greatly, increases intestinal absorption of that dietary calcium. You also have hormonal secretions. There is one of them that you may have heard of before called HGH. HGH is human growth hormone. And basically, what you see in human growth hormone is that it is being produced from the pituitary gland, and it's responsible for the general growth of all tissues. So HGH is involved in the growth of all tissues, and in the bone, it's going to stimulate the reproduction of cartilage cells at that epiphyseal plate. So when you have hyposecretion in children, that will result in dwarfism, so a hyposecretion. So that's you're not secreting enough, you're under. That's going to result in dwarfism. So that would be insufficient growth hormone. And then the reverse of that is the hypersecretion, excessive growth hormone. And that's going to result in gigantism. And these disorders are discussed in chapter 13. You also have sex hormones, hormones that will play a role. The sex hormones are from both the male and female gonads, such as testosterone and estrogen, respectively. And basically, what these are going to do is around puberty, you're going to have an abundance of these hormones that come into play, and it's going to cause considerable long bone growth during adolescence. And basically, what they'll do is they'll aid osteoblast activity and promote new bone growth to occur. They will also degenerate cartilage cells at the epiphyseal plate, That is those cells that are pretty fairly close to that epiphyseal plate. And then you have estrogen, which is going to have a greater effect than the androgen effect, and that is talked about a little bit in the textbook. Another hormone that plays a role are thyroid hormones. Thyroid hormones, you have T4, which is thyroxine, Thyroxine. T4 or thyroxine is going to stimulate the replacement of cartilage by bone in epiphyseal plate. And also the thyroid hormone called calcitonin, Calcitonin, and that calcitonin is going to act on several sites to decrease the blood calcium levels. You also have PTH. PTH is a hormone called parathyroid hormone. Parathyroid, Parathyroid. Parathyroid hormone is from the parathyroid glands, and it's going to stimulate those osteoclasts to reabsorb bone. Lastly, you have the physical exercise, and the physical exercise is going to play a role in growth and repair and development of the bone. Basically, physical stress stimulates bone growth, that's hypertrophy, and lack of exercise, atrophy, is going to lead to bone tissue or wasting. And you'll learn a little bit more about that and a little bit more about the bone and exercise as we get into the chapter on articulations in chapter 8. That would be joints. All right, so let's look at bone function. Bone shape, support, and protect body structures as far as support, movement, and protection. Support, as far support, protection, and movement, the bone is going to support in legs, and the pelvis are going to support the trunk. And then you have the first vertebrae, and that first vertebrae is given a special name called the atlas, kind of like a atlas of maps. That first vertebrae called the atlas is going to support the skull. Next, the skeletal system is going to play a role in protection, and it's going to protect those underlying organs. And basically, you know that the skull is going to protect the brain, and the rib cage is the protection for the heart and the lungs, etc. Bones also play a role in movement, and that will be discussed more in chapters 8 and 9 when we do articulation and then get into the muscular system. But you do have skeletal muscles that are attached to bones by tendons, and the bones are going to serve as the levers to move bones. So bone movement serves as levers to move appendages, so on and so forth, via the muscles. You also know that bone plays a role in blood formation, and that is called hematopoiesis. Basically, all blood cells are formed in the red marrow of certain bones. So hematopoiesis is the formation of blood in the body. Bone also plays a role as far as its function. It plays a role in the storage of inorganic salts. The most abundant salt is calcium phosphate. Other salts include magnesium ions, sodium ions, potassium ions, and carbonate ions. The inorganic salt storage, you've learned that the major salt there being hydroxyapatite, primarily calcium phosphate, Ca3PO42, OH2, is going to give bone its hardness and rigidity. You do have the calcium is required for many metabolic processes, including muscle contraction and nerve impulse conduction. The other thing there is blood calcium homeostasis must be maintained because blood calcium homeostasis is maintained and going to actually direct the remodeling of the bone matrix. And also, blood calcium homeostasis is basically the matrix of bone is indeed that calcium. So recall that once a bone is formed, it is continuously being remodeled throughout your life. And the process involves the action of both those osteoblast and osteoclast. And you have those hormones such as calcitonin and PTH, the parathyroid hormone, that in turn is going to affect those blood calcium levels. So that is a homeostatic mechanism there. Basically, what you have going on there, if I go back to this slide, the PTH, the parathyroid hormone, which is secreted by the parathyroid gland when calcium levels are low, it's going to stimulate the osteoclast activity to reabsorb. The reabsorption of bone will occur, and it's going to release calcium 2 plus, Ca2 plus ions into the blood. And ultimately, this is going to cause the kidney tubules to reabsorb Ca2 plus back into the blood. And then it's going to cause intestinal mucosa to increase that dietary absorption of Ca2 plus and cause an increase in the blood calcium levels, which will basically be restored back to normal. Calcitonin, which is secreted by the thyroid gland when the blood levels are too high. So it's that whole looping mechanism, feedback mechanism. When calcitonin is secreted by the thyroid gland when the calcium levels are too high, it's going to inhibit the bone resorption and increased osteoblast activity, and that is to cause the deposition of the bone matrix. And then what you have there is it's going to cause those kidney tubules to secrete excess Ca2 plus into the urine and therefore result in a decrease in the blood calcium levels, and that will bring it back to normal. And we'll look at, I'll draw this on the board. I'll have this on the board for you to examine the blood calcium homeostasis. So in finishing with the chapter, ultimately what we come down to is the actual number of bones in the human skeleton does vary from person to person, but typically there are about 206 bones in the skeletal system, and the 206 bones and joints are going to allow for many functions of the human body. And these bones and their features you'll learn about as we break down the skeleton, we've already started to do that. So you do have the skeleton, which is divided into those two major regions, the axial skeleton and the appendicular skeleton. And the axial skeleton is going to include the bones of the skull, the hyoid bone, the vertebral column, and the thoracic cage. And then you also have the appendicular skeleton, which is going to include the limbs of the upper and lower extremities and the bones that attach those limbs to the trunk. And that would be the pectoral and the pelvic girdle. The skull itself, if you look at the skull, is the cranium, the brain case, and the facial bones. You have, in addition to the figures presented in the chapter, you can look at the plates on 26 through 54 on pages 254 and 268 of your textbook. So this will give you a better picture of the human skull. But all the bones of the skull except the mandible are firmly interlocked along structures called sutures. And basically what we see there is, here you can see those sutures there. The sutures is an area where the skull bones fuse together or articulate. And whenever you talk about an articulation, you're talking about a joint or joining bones. You have the sutural wormian bones. The sutural or wormian bones are tiny bones within the skull that lie between the major skull bones. And I'm going to see if I could get a good I'll show you a picture of those when we get there. So we'll look at the different bones. We'll continue to break down the skeleton, so you could see the different parts of the bone there. Uh, and that's it for today. So this ends our lecture as far as the lecture component of the skeletal system. This ends for the test, but then we do have the lab practical, and we'll focus more on that with the pictures in both class and in lab. Have a great day, everybody.